Our first speaker of the night is the brilliant Monika Bhatt, a senior technical writer at Canva. Tech writing is one of the most underrated parts of software development, and Monika is here to share why it matters. She'll give us tips and tricks and a little tough love about why most of us need to up our documentation game. With over a decade of experience and a wealth of knowledge, Monika will guide us into the world of tech writing and how it can make life easier for everyone. Please give a warm welcome to Monika. We'll just do a few setup before she starts.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. Welcome to the last meetup of the year, I think. I've given this talk 2 times before, so I've run out of all jokes. So let's get started with some questions. Before that, I'd like to thank Geshendai for this opportunity for the DevFest as well as for today. And I'd like to thank my husband at home for looking after our 1-year-old husband and brother-in-law so that I can be here. And thank you to my sister who is out there taking my pictures because I asked her to. Otherwise, she would not. Yeah, so let's get started with some questions. How many of you know what tech writing exactly is? Nice. How many of you love writing? Okay, I can see a few hands. Thank God I don't see a lot of hands because otherwise this talk would be useless. I'm going to talk about what tech writing exactly is, since all of you don't know what it is. And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how you can write better. Because the title is I Can Code, Can You Write? I don't mean it in an arrogant manner. I just mean to say that tech writers do know a little bit of coding so that it makes our life easier. We don't have to go around asking developers for code samples and stuff like that. And all of us as professionals should know how to write and should know how to write effectively. So that's all what my presentation is all about. So my agenda is pretty simple. I'll talk a little about who am I, what is tech writing, why should you care about what tech writing is, and how can you write better. So I'll start with who am I. I'm Monika Bhatt. I'm working as a senior technical writer at Canva. So when I was growing up and somebody asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I used to say I wanted to be a doctor. So I became an engineer, and now I'm a technical writer. So I never knew what tech writing exactly is until and unless I started doing it. My career in writing started when I was doing my bachelor's in engineering. So I wanted to earn some extra bucks, and I found content writing. So content writing, what it involved was writing like cheesy, gossipy articles like, who is Johnny Depp dating? What did Donald Trump say? And that kind of content is what I did. Then I moved on to write some trekking and travel and tourism content because I'm from Nepal, and trekking and travel and tourism is pretty popular out there. Then I moved into technical writing, and I came to Australia to do my master's. And then I'm also doing technical writing still. Another question, how many of you use trains for transport? Of course, all of you do, right? How many of you know the Tangara fleet of trains? Have you seen Tangara? Yeah. So Tangara trains were getting an upgrade. So they were display monitors and units were being installed there. And I did the documentation for that as well. And probably that's why they don't have the monitors yet. But whenever you see Tangara, please remember me. Okay, that's all. I'll get into it now. So let's start with what is tech writing. So if somebody asks you that question, you would be like, it's just writing technical stuff, right? But then it's much more than that. It involves API documentation, product documentation, infrastructure design, architecture design, search, and engineering docs, which I'll talk about in the slides to follow. So the first and foremost and the most simple thing about technical writing is writing product documentation. So what is a product? A product can be anything. It can be a software as a service, it can be a conventional application, or it can also be an orange. So how do you peel the orange? How do you eat the orange? How do you throw the peel of the orange into the dustbin? So that's a product, though not technical, but that's a product, right? So writing something about a product is what technical writing is about. So you firstly understand the product, because you cannot write about a product that you don't understand. You understand how it solves user problems, and then you write how to solve a user problem using the docs as code workflow. So what is docs as code workflow? I'll talk about it in the slides to follow. The second thing is API documentation. So API documentation is also something technical writers do. So you understand the API, you document parameter descriptions and error handling messages. So usually in companies where there is no technical writer, parameter descriptions and error handling messages are done by developers. But then in companies with technical writers, tech writers do that. So we use and we test the APIs. We create the API reference using Swagger, OpenAPI, Redoc, etc. And then we also create example apps and include the code samples in docs. So this is where the I can code part comes in, right? So as a technical writer, I also need to write sample codes, include code samples, and create example apps before I document something. Then comes a very loose term called engineering docs. So this is also something tech writers do. It can include creating architecture docs. So you have a product and you have its architecture. So who would be the person well placed to understand the architecture and write about it in the simplest terms? That would be a technical writer. Then comes design docs. Yes, developers write design docs usually, but then in companies where design docs are too technical and need to be understandable for a wider audience, tech writers chip in. Then comes the engineering best practice docs. So let's imagine you have a company with 10,000 employees, like 10,000 developers. So how do all those 10,000 developers know where and how to which apps to use, what code practices to follow? This kind of stuff is also written by technical writers. Then comes training materials. So onboarding of engineers and everything comes on the job of a technical writer. And lastly, white papers. Then comes the architecture design part. Architecture design means the architecture of the content that you are creating. So just like code, your documentation should also be modular. So there might be some content that is reusable across different documents. How do you make it modular? How do you manage the hierarchy and navigation of the document, the top-down structure? How do you categorize content? So if a content is talking about a user journey, it should go into the user guide. If it's talking about a question and an answer for the question, it should go into the frequently asked questions section. So the categorization of content is also something that tech writers do. Then comes standardization. Each company has its own brand value. Each company has its own standards documents, its own style guide. So that is also something tech writers should follow before writing documentation. Then comes the maintenance part. So imagine you have an API documentation that has a breaking change. Your developers are using the documentation to create the APIs. If your breaking change is not reflected in the documentation properly, it is going to break the API. So the maintenance part of the documentation is also something that tech writers do. Then comes infrastructure design, which is a very interesting aspect of tech writing. So you have your documentation, you have your content. Where do you put it? What is the infrastructure behind that technical documentation? So do you use a content management system? A content management system is simply a documentation application like WordPress, where what you put is what you see kind of thing. So you just put in your content there and it is hosted somewhere automatically. Then comes static site generator. So this is what is meant by docs as code workflow. A static site generator is a bunch of code where you feed in code as markdown and restructured text. So that is your documentation. And your output is either HTML or PDF or text outputs. So that's why gone are the days where documentation was done in Microsoft Word. So I have nothing against Microsoft Word. It's a great tool for writing single page documents and blog documents and stuff like that. But then Microsoft Word is not suitable for user documentation or product documentation. So how do you create product documentation? You use a static site generator. So you feed in markdown files or restructured text files, and then you create the outputs, which are PDF or HTML. So the PDF and HTML output, arranging them as per your requirement, that is also something tech writers need to think about. And then pushing all of this content in version control systems like Git and SVN is also something tech writers do. You can use a paid or open source solution, and some examples of static site generators are mkdocs, Things, Gatsby, and Hugo. Then comes the hosting part of it. So you have all this documentation. Where do you host it? Cloudflare pages, read the docs. You can host it in your internal servers, or you can just, like, if your product is an ISO that just is shipped every release, you can probably bundle the PDF files with that ISO and then push it. So in that case, you might not even need hosting at all. Then comes the CI/CD. So continuous integration and continuous delivery is also something tech writers need to think about. Automated builds, publishing. We also need staging and prod environments so that our half changes are not in prod. And using hooks and linters, formatting and grammar checks. So you can see that the tech writer is wearing different hats. It's DevOps as well. It's developer as well, because a lot of companies do not even have technical writers, and having someone to support technical writers is a rare occurrence. So tech writers are usually involved in all of this. The other thing is, just imagine you're coming home after a long day at work and you want to eat some pizza and you want to order some pizza. So in your browser, you put in the search query, pizza restaurants near me. Now your search results are showing how to make pizza. So you want to order pizza and eat it, but your search results are showing pizza recipes. So you can have the best pizza restaurant in town, but if it's not searchable, it's not usable, right? Similarly, amazing content without good search is like throwing a diamond in the ocean and hoping someone will find it. So search is yet another important aspect of technical writing. Now you have the infrastructure, you have the content. How do you make it searchable for everyone? Do you use built-in functionalities? So remember, I talked about content management systems and static site generators, right? So some of those have built-in functionalities such as ViewPress Search, Hugo Search. Or do you use external plugins? So you can integrate external plugins into your documentation, like Algolia, JavaScript Search, Lunar.js, to make search better. Or you can use a custom solution. So a custom solution can include semantic search. So what the meaning of semantic is like, semantic means meaning behind words. So the term orange might mean color to you, but then it might mean fruit to me. So there's a difference in the understanding of the same word, right? So that is what semantic search is. So if you need a very high-level custom solution, you might probably use Elasticsearch, vector search, etc., to deploy your semantic search solution for your infrastructure. Next is personalization and user profiling. You can probably use like Google Analytics and AI to personalize your search results and build user profiles, recommend documentation based on the previous search queries and stuff like that. You can also use AI-driven chatbots to answer queries to where documentation can be found, and integrate a feedback loop for continuous learning to know if the research results that users are getting is actually usable or not. So this is all that's involved in the infrastructure part of search. What about the content? The content also needs to be searchable. So you need to optimize content for search by using relevant keywords and compelling title and descriptions. So remember, I talked about the title, Who is Johnny Depp Dating, right? So someone who is very interested in Johnny Depp's dating career will enter that search query. So you need to be writing your article as that as the title and that as the keyword. So that is how you optimize content for search. So that is also something we need to think about. You need to write engaging content and optimize the structure as well. So I talked a lot about what tech writing is, and I've given you a lot of background on what exactly tech writers do. But why should you care? Why should you care about what tech writing is? How many of you here, recent graduates looking for a job, looking for a career switch? Okay, so if you guys can write well, make complex things simple, there's some development involved in technical writing as well, do that and be able to write effectively, then it can be a good career prospect for you. That's one thing. The other thing is missed use cases. Since technical writers are involved in the software development lifecycle at the very end and are very close to the users, there might be use cases that are missed that tech writers can point out. The other thing is there's no use of a product that no one can use. So you can have the best product, but if nobody knows how to use it, then it's no use, right? So your product becomes usable only after you have effective documentation. So that's where tech writers come into play. The other thing is testing and QA. Before we write documentation, I cannot write about a product that I don't understand. So I obviously test the entire product and its workflow, right? So tech writers also act as an extra layer of testing and QA. The other thing is middle person. So you might have two teams working in different things, and there's no point of contact between them. So this team is referring to the same thing as Orange, and this team is referring to the same thing as Mandarin. Who would be best suited to know that there's a difference in the understanding would be the tech writer, because tech writers are most concerned about consistency about in the like documentation, right? So tech writers usually also act as a middle person. The other thing is improved UX. Since I said before, like I said before, tech writers care about the brand voice, brand identity, how the UI looks, how the UX looks. So in having tech writers can improve your UX as well. Now I talked a lot about I can code. Let's come into the can you write part. So as professionals, we all need to write well, right? So how can you write well? So this is what is known as the 6 C's of writing well. I don't expect you all to remember all the 6 C's, but even if you can remember a few, that would be good. So whenever you're writing, your writing should be clear. It's pretty self-explanatory. It should be clear. It should be concise. It should give the message in as less words as possible. It should be coherent. The flow should be nice. Like you cannot have the introduction at the end. It should have the introduction at the first, and then the steps, and then reference at the end. It should be consistent. So as I mentioned before, you cannot refer to the same thing as Orange in one part of the documentation and then Mandarin in other part and lemons in the other part. So consistency is also something you need to think about. Then it should be correct, which is also pretty self-explanatory. And it should be complete. You cannot have half documentation and confuse your users. Now, I'll give some examples on how you can write well. So first and foremost, when you start writing, think of your audience. Let's take the topic of Wi-Fi, for example. So for a general public who is not too technical, you can write Wi-Fi as an invisible librarian who delivers books to your devices. But then for IT professionals, you can write it's a wireless network protocol, allows devices to communicate over radio waves. But then for network engineers, you can write it operates on IEEE standards. For marketing professionals, you can write it's an invisible thread connecting our devices to the world. So just imagine giving the definition of for network engineers to the general public. They will not be able to understand it, right? So always think of your audience. You cannot be expected to write the same document 4 times for different audiences. That's understandable. But what you need to do is think of your audience with the least level of technical skill, always. So there might be project managers who are not technical. So if your documentation is being read by project managers, you should not be using jargons and like technical terms. So think of them as your audience and then write. The developers will be able to understand it anyhow, but then if you can make it understandable to the audience with the least level of technical skill, then you're good to go. The second thing is I'll give you a minute to read this, but then a minute would also not be enough because this is very, very jargony. But all this means to say is my name is Monika Bhatt. So you can see that writing a lot of jargony technical terms does not make communication effective. You don't have to be Shakespeare to write. You don't have to have a very big, great vocabulary. You can write in the most simplest and the in simplest words in the most effective way. So don't use jargons a lot. Don't use technical terms and until and unless necessary. And this is how you achieve clarity and conciseness. Avoid jargons wherever possible. The other thing is, look at this image with some, it's got some good pictures, cactus, some cushions, but then all of it jumbled together does not make sense. Then look at this one, which has less stuff, but it's well managed and it puts the message across that it's a bedroom and it looks nice. So always remember less is more. Whenever you write something, go through it again and remove whatever is unnecessary. If the message is coming across with the least amount of words possible, then do it. So always remember the less is more motto when you're writing communication. The other thing is prose versus lists with emphasis. So this is a paragraph that talks about oranges, and the other paragraph still talks about oranges, but then it has bold and benefits. The word benefits is emphasized and italicized. So you just one scan and you can know that it's talking about oranges and the benefits and what the benefits are. So always use lists, always use emphasis wherever possible. Nobody likes to read long paragraphs. Shorten your paragraphs as much as possible. Make your paragraphs like maximum 2 lines. And whenever possible, write everything in lists because lists are easier for users to understand. So this is also how you can make your documentation effective. The other thing is visuals always speak louder than words, but I'll use the term sometimes. So use screenshots wherever you can, use flowcharts, use short videos, use mind maps, and use tables wherever possible to put your point across easily. But then remember, nobody wants to look at a 10-minute video of you doing something if they could just read few lines and do the same thing. So don't overdo it. Yes, visuals are really good. Visuals make documentation easier to understand, but then don't overdo it. So use visuals sparingly. The last thing, the last tip I want to give you guys is to remember the bar of remember. It's very easy, okay? Remember the bar of remember. So remember as bar at the end, remember that. So what does bar stand for? B stands for background. So whenever you're writing something, remember to give the background. The background can be an overview, purpose, definitions, some requirements, limitations, assumptions, anything that can give the user additional background on the context you are writing about, remember to put that in. The E stands for examples. So once you've written your content, if you can supplement it with examples, it makes everything easier. So always include code samples, use cases, common issues, questions, sample data, etc., to your documentation to make it clearer. The R stands for references. So your documentation or your content might not explain everything to the user. So put in references wherever you can. Links to other documents, links to definitions, links to other standards documents, related links, websites, online resources, anything that can supplement the information for the user, include it in your documentation. So if you remember the word of remember, your documentation becomes complete. So it's not incomplete. I'll give you an example. So this sentence says, orange trees infected by citrus greening disease can see a yield reduction up to 50% or more. So this has no context. You don't know what this is talking about. But then if you just add an overview about what citrus greening disease is, what its impact on cultivation is, and what references the user can refer to get additional information, you're good to go. This becomes a complete piece of document where the user is not confused. So don't put in random words everywhere or random sentences everywhere. Just remember to supplement it with either background, examples, or references. So I've talked a lot, but then the key takeaways from this talk is think of your audience. Whenever you're writing, think of your audience. Write with the least, write with the audience with the least level of technical skill in your mind. Avoid unnecessary jargon. You don't have to be Shakespeare to write. Yes, you can be Shakespeare if you are a poet or if you are writing poetry and fiction and everything. But then in technical communication or in professional communication, avoid unnecessary jargon and use as simple words as possible. Less is more. Don't write long sentences, long paragraphs. Use lists and emphasis wherever possible because that makes documentation clearer and more effective. Use visuals, but use it sparingly. Don't overdo it. And remember the word of remember, which is background, examples, and references. With this, I'd like to end my talk. Thank you. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question because that's a really existing issue because even in Australia, tech writers are not like employed by a lot of companies. So that's why a lot of you don't know what technical writing exactly is. So what I suggest is you probably use Jira or some ticketing mechanism to track your features, right? To track your tickets, track the work that you do. So whenever, when we worked before for another company, what we did was whenever you have a feature request or a feature ticket for a developer, you have it for a QA as well, and then you also have it for a technical writer. So what that does is that tracks whatever changes you're doing. So if you have a base documentation, and after that, whatever changes you're doing, you're creating a ticket for that, then anyone will be able to pick that ticket, will know the context, will be able to update the documentation. And the other thing is, like, I would suggest update it as your development goes by. Yes, you can come back to it and do the changes later. Yes, your documentation might not be as good as what a technical writer would do, but at least if there is something, there is scope for cleaning it up. So always do it concurrently with SDLC because technical writing is integral and integrated with SDLC, which people do not realize a lot about. So that's my suggestion. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, how vulnerable is like technical writing as a job right now with emerging chat GPTs and other AI tools that can write almost a report in few seconds that would take a human to write it in a week or so. So how vulnerable would be your job?
How vulnerable is software development since like ChatGPT and AI can write code? See, right?
Not
It's
like development with writing.
yeah, it's the, I could say ask the same question about development. I could ask the same question about QA, and the answer would be the same. It makes life easier, but then it does not take away the job. Why? Because the context or the human context that you needed is needed for technical writing or development or QA or anything is not replaceable by AI, at least right now. I don't know about the future. Maybe in the future, developers won't exist anymore as well. But then for now, yeah, that might be true because right now, even when we code, it's like so easy because I can just like put in something to ChatGPT. I don't need to go around asking for help, right? Sometimes I get stuck. Yes, I have to go and ask for help. So the stuck phase would come for everyone because AI and ChatGPT cannot replace the human context, right? So you could ask the same question for everything. We don't know what the future holds, but then it would be the same answer as it would be for developers.
Got a question. The other guy said, your answer to the other guy on how to make people write more documentation is to include it as part of their workflow, right? So
Yeah.
to get into documents. Oftentimes, developers want to focus on coding more than writing.
Yeah.
And management doesn't exactly monitor or keep developers accountable for
Yeah.
documentation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this leads to a lot of companies not writing documentation a lot, which is, I believe, what you understand.
Yeah.
So if you were like the first technical writer in a company which hated documentation, what would be your strategy to make documentation an important thing, and how would you pitch it to management, etc.?
Yeah, I've had this issue before because mostly a lot of companies I've worked for do not consider technical writing as a viable job, do not consider us to be technical enough. I do have a degree in IT, but then I've been told you're not technical enough, you don't understand anything kind of stuff. It's very prevalent because people don't understand that, right? So what I've done is I've fought back. I've always become the voice to always say we need to do this in the meetings, we need to, so if there is a technical writer, new technical writer, involve them in your daily workflow, involve them in all of your sprint planning, all of your sprint meetings, so they know what's going on and how to work around it. So that's how we have gotten things done. For companies which do not have a technical writer, yes, if you are interested or if you are concerned about the documentation, you could also raise a voice and say, let's all take responsibilities doing parts of the documentation, and maybe someone can go over it once everything is done. But then it's a management problem, it's a product problem, it's a thinking kind of problem, which is really difficult to remove. But then yeah, I've faced that issue before, and all I've done is fought back and then raised my voice and told everyone yes, we need to do this right now, because there have been instances when the product is already gone somewhere, and then we have not notified of the changes. And at the end, before the release, we are like, okay, these are the changes that are taking place, and we don't have time to do it. And we have to like stay up until 11, 12 a.m. and then do the work. So always integrate someone who is interested in writing into the daily flow or the sprint plannings or all the meetings. And I think that should solve your problem.
Okay, but I guess at the core, it is coupled to management. Like if management
Yeah,
doesn't,
exactly,
like,
exactly.
promote it, then it's like hard to.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a company issue, I would say, company or a management issue of not recognizing technical writers. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I recently started my development that I work for. So, like, it doesn't have any technical.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah.
You just start, and then like even the anybody who starts, they don't have any. You bring briefing.
Yeah.
There's like none. So how would one, like, let's say I want to start doing it because it makes my life easier as a developer as well.
Yeah.
So that I know like it's like how would I go around like about like using whatever tips you daily job. Like obviously they're not gonna hire technical.
Yeah, yeah.
But like it would be something that I would be interested in.
So what I've found is like people do not take words seriously, people take tickets seriously. So if you create tickets and then assign it to someone, or like have it assigned to yourself, or like, put up a point in your meeting or something saying that we have these tickets we need to solve. Let's get it sorted. Let's divide it and do it. That is one way to get started. The other thing would be like create a repo for documentation using static site generators that I talked about, and then push stuff in. At least it's better than having nothing at all, right? So you can host it somewhere. It can be an internal server. There are so many free tools available. You can host it somewhere, and then it's at least accessible to you. So get started with that, and then create tickets because that makes people accountable. I think that's how you do it in situations where you don't have a technical writer. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think tickets would be, your notebook will not be taken as seriously as tickets would be. So yeah. You.
Any other questions?
Yeah. So if you want a career, if you want to pursue a career in technical writing, yeah. Ah, okay. I think it's pretty simple when you are pushing code into GitHub. Use your README. README is in MD, right? It's marked down. It's pretty like, whenever you open your GitHub repo, you can see everything there. Use your README and like, use the tips I've given before. Have a background, examples, references, run it through Grammarly. It's a great tool to like, get rid of all your grammar errors and stuff like that. And maybe use AI as well. But then at least have something there in the README, because I think whenever somebody sees your repo, README is the first thing they go through. And if your README is not good enough, it gives a bad impression, I would say. So as a developer, I think README is also a very important thing that you should like, think about and write about properly. So I think that would be the best thing. I think probably, does it answer your question?
Last two questions. And guys, there's pizza, so you can go grab some slices. We'll do a 10 minutes break after this.
Yeah, okay.
Inputs?
Regarding the point about tickets, you said that you guys would not take tickets. Three, four, tickets. There's also another side of it. Although they do the job, don't really update it. The back of have like separate. No one's still not really updating it because my manager usually keeps us people updating. And in such scenario, how do you suggest handling it?
So I would say show them the issue and then they'll think of the solution. Show them the gap that exists when there is a lack of technical communication. Like tell them like, okay, we don't have communication for like technical documentation for onboarding, for example. So it's so difficult to onboard people without documentation. I am wasting this much time on onboarding. These are the hours I spend for onboarding. So if you show them the gap, probably they'll take you seriously. If you just, I said earlier, right? If you just like vocalize it, it's not going to happen. If you put it into numbers and words and you say like, I spend this much time onboarding this individual, whereas that could be done by this much documentation, you could speak up and then that would be probably taken seriously. So I think that's how you get started in a company which does not like, have like give technical writers some importance.
Yeah, so this question is kind of about in-code and out-code documentation. And the good thing about in-code documentation is that if someone actually changes instructions and things completely, hopefully when the comments are in front of you when you know they're wrong, someone will delete them or update them. But on the other hand, that's maybe not the right structure. I know there are some tools that take in-code documentation, blah, 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 but perhaps that's not the correct format. On the other hand, you have sort of things out of code, except sort of repository or a separate.
Yeah.
Then it just kind of gets stale after a while, and no one really uses this, but 2 years later, actually, this is not relevant.
Yeah.
So maybe is there any ideas on sort of trying to get the best of both worlds there? Having things that sort of are documentation that's the suitable format, but also is in people's spaces so they get it updated.
Yeah. So the things I talked about in my talk is not usually about the in-code documentation. It's about the outcode thing. So outcode is still code. So what you do is you create a GitHub repository with a static site generator and you push your documentation there. It's not pushing your development code there. It's pushing your documentation there in markdown and restructured text. So that's there, right? So you are talking about the updating it part, right? So whenever there is some part of the code that's changed here, you create your tickets, you create sub tickets for technical writing, and then you ask whoever is responsible for the development or the QA to at least update it. So that's how you put it, keep it updated. You have to make them know. I would say like create a GitHub repo. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that's dealt with in a management perspective rather than the technical perspective. But then you could also have like some, tickets and links to the GitHub repo that needs changing, which markdown file might need changing, because how the content is structured in static site generators is there's a list of markdown text, markdown files. So one can be overview, the second can be introduction, the third can be examples, the fourth can be steps. So those are the markdown files which are included in an index file. So you can let them know like this is the markdown that needs changing. So if you point them to the right direction, probably somebody will take it seriously. So in the tickets, if you just point them to the direction where the changes need to take place, probably then somebody will take it seriously. But then I found that creating Jira tickets is the best way to do it because it holds people accountable. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. The 6 C's are going to be the motto of my life.